External skill pools. Today we'll look at how they operate, where skills get built, how you can validate them, what you lose when judgment drifts outside, and that's where we left it in the last episode. Most organizations still have not designed the boundary, not the organizational chart boundary, but the competence boundary. What must stay inside to remain credible and what can safely live outside. Because the minute capability lives outside, orchestration becomes the advantage. So let's go straight there. How external skill pools actually operate, where skills really get developed, how skills get validated in practice, and what organizations lose when they outsource capability without retaining judgment. Let's first define external skill pools to understand it properly. People talk about external skill pools like it's one thing. It's not. In the real world, you access external capability through a small set of operating models, and they behave very differently. Here, I'm going to share with you the five of them that actually we buy from. One is the outcome providers, consultancies, agencies, specialist boutiques. You are not buying a person, of course, you are buying delivery and accountability for an outcome that you want. Then there are independent talent networks there. These are freelancers, contractors, fractional specialists. You are buying time and skill here, but integration and quality control sits more heavily with you. Then there are platform mediated work marketplaces. These are matching work to talent. Here, speed can be high, but the whole game becomes validation here. Then we can see there are some managed services. A provider runs a capability end to end. This heavily reduces your internal workload. It can also create dependency if you don't retain judgment. There is another option, vendor plus tool bundles. The tool is inseparable from the provider's work here. The deliverables is not just service, they are providing you the whole workflow. You don't have control on that, of course. Now, why I'm sharing this with you, why this matters? Because where skills are developed and how validation works is not same across these models. If you govern them all the same way, you will misjudge risk. Your question must be if skills are changing for everyone, where to find them, who is developing them. So let's strip romance out of it. External skill pools don't have magical people, they have different learning economies. There are three engines that build capability in external pools. First engine is repetition across contexts. External providers see the same class of problem across many clients. Internal teams might build that capability once every few years. So that takes time. A specialist provider executes version of it repeatedly. It creates actually pattern recognition, and that pattern recognition becomes judgment. The second engine is market funded upskilling. In external markets, learning is not optional. Skills decay shows up as lost work, lost income, lost relevance. So people and firms invest in learning because employability depends on it. That cost sits with the provider, then get priced into the market. Third engine is narrow depth as a product. Internal roles often require breadth. External roles can monetize depth. Depth builds faster because work is concentrated here. So the honest answer to who trains them is repetition, incentives, specialization, which forces you to ask the next question: how skills are validated in real world, and where organization might get fooled if you don't take actually if you want to take one thing from here is validation is the bottleneck here. OECD has been explicit about a practical problem in skill first approaches. Signaling. When someone can signal a skill more convincingly, then they can perform it. So, what do organization actually use that validation? We can go with, um, I'm going to share four of them. First one is the credentials. All of you know that they share just single baseline knowledge. They rarely predict performance in your context. You know that. And if we look at the reputation and referrals, sometimes a strong signal, but it might produce network bias and can hide weak execution behind branding. Then there is portfolio and casework, better than credentials, but curated and context specific. People can show outcomes without showing process quality. Then trial observed work. This is the only validation method that consistently behaves like the proof. This might be a paid pilot, a sample work, a small sprint with clear acceptance criteria. So a mature organization stops asking, do you have the skill? And start asking, can you demonstrate it under our standards with our constraints in our content scope? And that's not skepticism, that's responsible operating design. Why external pools feel easier in short term? External capability often feels easier because it arrives packaged: scope, deliverables, timelines, and a sense that accountability sits outside. And that's a sense. And that's why organizations move beyond internal polls, and even when internal polls have value. So skills volatility is not slowing, as we all looking that 39% of worker core skill gonna be changed by 2030. That level of change is hard to absorb through static role structures alone. So, organizations extend outwards to specialist firms, platform work, managed providers, and AI embedded into workflows. That's not ideology, it's scoping, but it can become liability when it turns into dependency. If organization outsource capability without retaining judgment, that part that part doesn't show up as a dramatic failure. It shows as a drift. How? Learning drifts outside. If the hardest work repeatedly happens outside, internal teams stop living through edge cases. They stop accumulating the neons. That becomes judgment. Your people can still coordinate, but they stop building capability. Even standards drift. And if standards drift, standards are not explicit and enforced internally, good enough becomes whatever arrives on time. Quality becomes negotiable. That's identity erosion, not only delivery risk. And if drift happens in decisions, this is the critical one. Over time, leaders start deferring to the vendor's recommendation, to platform ratings, to industry best practice, to the tool output. And once the decision authority drifts outward, the organization doesn't become more flexible, it dilutes. This is why your boundary question is not optional, because outsourcing execution is manageable. Outsourcing judgment is organizational dilution. So, what must remain internal even in blended model? That's why, but we can. A useful boundary is this: execution can move, decision rights must stay. If you want to remain competent and credible, what stays internal is decision rights. Who chooses trade offs, risk acceptance, who owns consequences, quality authority, who can reject work based on standards, system integration, how parts connect in the whole operating model, identity constraints, purpose based lines you don't cross, even if it's efficient. That's how you preserve identity while using external tools. Not by resisting reality, by designing. The workforce risk lens you can't ignore if you use large platform mediated work or large scale external sourcing. You inherit governance responsibilities around fairness, transparency, and standards of work. That's why the World Economic Forum's principles for platform work exist. Distributive work skills opportunity, but governance gaps show up first if fairness and transparency are not explicit. You don't need to be a platform company to learn the principle. When work becomes distributed, trust doesn't come from messaging. Trust comes from rules people can see. That's why orchestration is the competitive advantage here, where we are going to move next. Once capability lives across employees, external providers, platform tools, and AI embedded in work, then hardest problem is no longer do we have talent? It becomes who decides what stays inside and what moves outside. How quality is judged, where accountability sits, how learning is retained, how standards don't drift, how identity doesn't dilute. That's orchestration problem. And workforce ecosystem research from MIT and Deloitte points to this same reality. Ecosystems require integrated coordination across functions, not siloed management. Two organizations can access the same external market. One becomes faster, more resilient, and more controlled. The other becomes fragmented and dependent. Same access, different orchestration. So, external pools are not a trend to adopt or reject. That's what I wanted to share with you. They are a capability source. The question is whether you use them by design or not. If execution moves outside but judgment stays inside, you can scale without losing yourself. If execution moves outside and judgment also drifts outside, you don't scale capability, you dilute it. And in the next episode, I will bring orchestration, how to make orchestration made decision architecture, standard governance, and operating cadence that lets internal plus external and AI work together without losing quality and trust. And if you have any question regarding skills polls, how you can use them without losing your culture and identity, and get all those results and outcome that you want to achieve, feel free to reach me out. I'm always happy to help, and thank you for listening.